Lesson 4, The Conscious Dreamer. Henry Thoreau considered the best everyday life to be that of a dreamer. An Eck here means as a member of Eckankar. Does Harold Klemp or whoever succeeds him really care if members are conscious dreamers who recognize their eternal selves by taking dreams while sleeping and waking dreams as part of the big picture of life? The June 1989 issue of Natural History had an article by Jared Diamond called The Ethnobiologist's Dilemma. He visited the Kalam tribe of New Guinea. And since that's not Arabic, it's not the word or command tribe, so I don't know what that means, or even what language those people speak, and was told all sorts of words for plants and animals, but only one for rocks. He thought he was being lied to when a biologist friend returned with him, and he found out that there were many words for rocks instead of one. They later told him it seemed pointless to tell him more than the general word, as they didn't think it worth the effort to tell him about their concepts of rocks, as they did with his geologist friend. Does understanding hidden truths require experiences of the spiritual exercises of Eck that result in visions of being in golden wisdom temples? Perhaps the experience of the Eckankar teachings does. How can man have strived to know the secrets of Eckankar since early times, when not even Paul Twitchell was heard mentioning it until 1964? In the context of dreams and divination as ways to discover knowledge, was certainly part of the culture of Akkad. Hammurabi, to those who can't read that language, united it with Sumer to form what we know as the Babylonian Empire. It centered around what was called Ka Dinger Ra, or Earth God Heavens. In the language of the empire, it was Babarush, or Gate of the Gods. Perhaps it was Gate of Divinity. People who are monotheists, some of these languages have, it depends on your intention, how you're going to use some of that, but it eventually was called Babylon, after Babel or gates, the Aramaic name for the city. And Aliyun are the highest. Were there really gods that ran the universe in mysterious ways that required divination to understand? It certainly touches on the truth that all of life was to be regarded as a religious experience. One hasn't heard reference to low and high magic in Eckankar, and high magic as an individual, idea, rather than, the developmental sort of magic. So they don't distinguish, and they don't really mention the one type. But they do use different phrases to describe the same things that other metaphysicians do. Divination is called the low road, and dreams a high road, on page 79 of the Eck Dream 2 Discourses by Harold Klemp. Divination could include a study of almost anything. Harold Klemp admitted to having a lot of aimless talk in one of his seminar talks, but fails to make clear how the Akkadian ways were wandering guidance and that his followers are on the right path. He does show respect for their passion for discovering hidden systems. Was their astrology more of an advancement upon older divination, as Harold Klemp implies, or the sort of advanced religious thinking that seems to be less direct and wandering from real guidance? Hammurabi is how he's referred to in Eckankar, was considered an Eckmaster who had some of his initiates reincarnate in recent times. Eckankar teaches that And Raji Desal was an Ekmaster there that made Chilas, or Eckankar initiates, more exalted than the gods of that time by making them witnesses to light and sound. Is a curiosity about Marduk and other Babylonian concepts, or about some area of history really a sign that you were there in a past life? Now, one of the comments to Surah 9, Surah 2, ayat 102, is that around 1800 BCE, there was a change in the Akkadian, in the Marduk idea. Marduk became thought of as some sort of usurper deity, rather than Marduk and Zerbati, or I guess maybe it's expressed a little bit differently. But the variation linguistically before that, basically like they were servants of God. And they had their tax, and it really aligns with that verse. But interestingly enough, it changes after that. And so you can say Abraham, at least part of the biblical Abraham story, would indicate that Abraham fled that cult. But most of the things that people call gods and goddesses are males and females like us that have choices. And so if you do well, you can do better than, if you do completely well, burn off your bad karma, as they say, and all that, then things can go differently, can't they? Should you try to renew your spiritual life by directly connecting to God, or by worshiping some spiritual master like the so-called Mahanta? Shams-e-Tabriz, of the birth year of 1184 CE, is based on Shams al-Din Muhammad of 1185 to 1248 for the Common Era. Friend and co-scholar of Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi or Rumi. This Shia Muslim was known for Maqalat-e-Shams-e-Tabrizi, discourse on Shams-e-Tabriz, his 40 rules of love, and most of all through his interaction with Rumi. The influence still affects millions, as Rumi is the most read and most translated poet in English works. The revival of Islam did give it a formal Sufi flavor, but the sectarian nature was not the intention of these Islamic fundamentalists. The evidence stands against the founding of the Mevlevi or any other Sufi order by Rumi or Shams. They did provoke Islamic revival, but it wasn't because of a change in Islam away from selfishness or any such thing as Harold Klemp implies. At least not as far as anyone knows in the objective world. Rumi was a Sunni and Shams was a Shiite until they met and strove for personal understanding and experience. This was a uniting of the Dionysian and Apollonian by people who regarded even their own interpretations and understanding as something to leave off, were it to conflict with what Muhammad ibn Abdullah came with. Wouldn't it be better to regard the Mesnavi of Rumi as being understanding upon Al-Quran and the teachings of the last exemplar prophet, rather than as proof he was following Eckankar or even founding a new faith? Pages 81 and 82 of the Dream 2 Discourses by Harold Klemp would have you think the Mahanta works with the dreams. Eckankar teaches its members to focus on who they call the living Ekmaster as much as possible. Any thought about so much has potential to make it into dreams that are remembered. People do distort their past and get attached to it as something different than it was. The Princess of Cups seems not to even know her original versions of some parts of her life, because she wanted that to either excuse her or remove aspects of her wrongdoing enough. Won't you say that the true enlightenment is temporal and spiritual, rather than this pole between power over space and wanting to be one with God that Harold Klemp speaks of? Eckankar wants you to think that he is one who became one with God. Isn't that even more arrogant than one who merely wishes to conquer an outer life? Spiritual problems are more than of the psychopath. They are of sociopathic natures too. John Donne, the English poet of 4 centuries ago, certainly understood that each is only a part of the whole. Human weakness and flaws is implied to be something that the leader of Eckankar merely recognizes. It doesn't take much knowledge of Harold Klemp to know of his many flaws and physical weaknesses. How then can he be an initiate's dream master who takes him to the second heaven to parade his karmic burdens of causes before him? How would dreaming about something in a causal plane pay for your debts of deeds? Now, I've talked elsewhere about the acausal. And so why is it called a causal? If obviously, if in a way it's referred to created. Well, acausal because there's something that's what we call evil and ignorance, and what Mazda Yesnehe, Zarathustra, Zoroastrianism calls the lie. Moha and Maya among the Hindus are some of the similar groups, some of the similar races or groups or whatever. These things are chosen. So it's not created, it's a choice made upon the created. So in that sense, it's acausal. So being a demon is something acausal. Of course, there is the uncreated, which is, I guess you could say beyond the causal and the causal, but because the cause of all causes. But anyways, that's different. Page 83 of the Eck Dream Discourses by Harold Klemp attempts to explain through love and collisions, I presume, a past life connection to good and bad karma. Wouldn't it be better to seek out an explanation of difficult feelings between spouses through this life rather than a dream about a couple who were convicted on false charges and leave jail to go on to different statuses in life? In the dream, she doesn't expose him, but he does his job to try her as a witch. Are women's grudges really carried over from past lives? Human awareness can be as a block of stone. Wouldn't it be more dense to be upset and claim someone deserved how you treated them and felt about them because of something you dreamt up? Eckankar makes you want to give up on the human condition. Leaving people in fear is seldom an act of love. Wouldn't it be better to take most dreams as something other than reminders of painful lessons? It is your own practice that makes waking life a trigger for conscious dreaming. Better than these, I want to feel oppressed, I want to feel offended, So it's a better type of trigger, right? Or is it subliminal messages from the head of a spiritual corporation? The difference between categorizing something as a dream and soul travel seems more sectarian than anything. Mystical experiences during the waking state are considered more direct. Why then the exaltation of the tiger's fang by Paul Twitchell to the place of scripture when Kirpal Singh rejected approval of it due to its being jumbled dreams? Contemplation in Eckankar is often like conversational prayer of other faiths, but one is to pretend like the so-called Ennead corporate kinesis, perhaps, masters are really answering prayers made to them. Can't spiritual help be granted without invoking intercessors with God? Tuesday, June 2nd, 2015, was the translation of my grandfather on my mother's side. So the story of a woman praying out the issue may affect me more than it otherwise would. The Eck Dream 2 Discourses by Harold Klemp has the story of a woman who prayed to her alleged Eckmaster till sorrow turned to gratefulness. A sound like a car was heard, and she heard lights moving about the room upon opening her eyes. Was this experience that resulted in a perceiving like she was in a room much larger than a bedroom? Is physically natural psychedelics are an example of soul travel as something beyond physically generated experiences. Okay, yeah, this needed some editing, but I wasn't getting the interactive response with this at the time. The Eck Dream 2 Discourses by Harold Klemp reminds on page 86 that conscious dreamer is not meant in Discourse 28 to refer to lucid dreaming, but to refer to anima, animus, and persona awareness, our inner and outer awareness. Surely he must be wrong in teaching that only Eck initiation and accepting the spiritual leader of Eckankar as a spiritual guide can open the spiritual eye. Haven't countless people of all spiritual categories gained some spiritual awareness by other means? If Eck means spiritual, God is a verb, or Holy Spirit, which would be Gabriel, Garuda, Vohu Manu, Bluebird, Jibril, or whatever the term is in your language, then it is always uplifting the consciousness of all life. To sound more inclusive, Harold Klemp refers to how people outside of Eckankar can be part of a spiritual lesson, and gave an example of a psychological talk on the radio about tracing emotional problems to early memories and trauma. Why the focus in Eckankar on ignoring that and trying to find past lives to explain our psychological ails? The doctor in the story thought that childhood memory of a woman who saw a boy torture and kill a gerbil explained why she had bad relationships with men when she was older and preferred pets over people. In the United States of America, people on average love dogs more than people. Aren't these better examples of karma influencing us than past life fantasizing? On the East Coast of America, a group performed a dream divination about an up-and-coming discourse, and their satsang, our spiritual study class. They tried to invoke their spiritual master to answer questions. That led them to think that it was their Mahanta, our station above others, the living Eck master or God man that was answering their questions for the 2 weeks. I would agree that turning off the TV and such things and doing a spiritual practice can help with practices of spiritual dreaming, though. Practices of collective consciousness or imagining a belonging can help foster the experience of closeness to masters of the Aragji, detached order. Eckists, Eckankar followers, spiritualism practitioners, or whatever else you choose. And so one of the things, and when I get to the end, the last one with this, I'm going to list out, if I recall right, this is the series where I list out all the Eckankar discourses. I mean, there's some further programs once for the fifth initiates that finish the program, because generally you don't get your fifth initiation until you finish the 17-year program. But yeah,